DesignOps. I have a very broad definition, and it's this. If it helps your team, it's DesignOps. Done. Okay, so what's an inspiration gallery? I'm going to be aiming my talk right here at this bubble. I want you to have a good time at UX New Zealand. When people ask, like, how did it go? I'm kind of aiming right there. And for me, the talks that I like the most, and we've had many of them this morning, the talks that I like the most are tangible. They give me like an actual thing I can actually write in those little sketchbooks, and I can go share them with my team. So that's what I'm aiming for. And so to that end, I'm going to share 8 things that have inspired me working at various companies. I worked at Twitter, I worked at Microsoft, I worked at Frog, I worked at an agency right now called Alfiro. So I've kind of done the whole gamut, large, small, agency, in-house, and we all struggle with like pretty similar issues. But what I've noticed is a lot of these companies have come up with some really interesting ideas that were like unique to this company or that company. So I brought them all together. We're going to talk about them today. Now, I want you to think back to the first time, your first day at your current job. If you're like most people, you are excited and you're ready to go. You're also nervous. You're not sure what's going to happen. And then this happens. Lots and lots of information. There's lots of links. There's lots of emails. There's lots of links to wikis and everything. And then you discover, uh-oh, even as you're reading it, people are letting you know that a lot of it's outdated. And so it's hard to know what in the world you should be paying attention to or not. And sometimes people refer to this as the one source of truth problem. If you don't have a single source of truth, it makes everything more complicated. So I'm going to talk about 8 things. The first 4 things are all around this topic, starting with something that I learned at Twitter. They're called Go links. They apparently got this idea from Google. It's this idea that on the internal network, you should be able to type go/ and then any word you want, and it'll go somewhere. So at Twitter, if you typed go/design, someone linked that to a wiki where the design team was. Go/holiday policy would go to like a Google Doc written by HR. You could put anything in here that you want, and it's great because it means everyone at the company has a shared understanding of where certain things are. And again, you could make your own. You have someone like, what happened at Twitter is everyone that did any initiative at all, they would all make a Go link for it. And you'd be like walking through the hallway. So is that Go move? Yeah, Go move. Okay, cool. Instead of what we do today, which is, I'll send you an email, and then the person forgets and you don't have the link, and it's not helpful. Speaking of email, I think Google Groups are incredibly important. Maybe it's not as exciting of a feature, but it's really revolutionary when you use it right. Google Groups, of course, is this simple idea that the 6 people on the team, let's say the team is called Cupcake. So cupcake at alfiro.com, right? That would go to all 6 people. And this makes sure that you don't leave people out of discussions, especially with clients. But the bigger issue is this. People quit. So this person down here, she's about to quit, and you don't know that yet. And the current situation means that when she leaves, everything good in her email box, everything that she's talked about, goes poof, which is not good. If you're using a Google Groups situation, you have one stored place for all this. Now you might be thinking, this is pretty similar to what Slack does, right? Totally. But everywhere that I work, Slack and email is pretty much used, together. And so having things in Slack, I think, is really good because it gets to the same thing, but having it in email as well is really, really good, so you can refer to it later. Whether you're referring to something discussed last week or 10 years ago, teams should have all that stuff in one place. That's not to say, though, that you should make every decision in email. Design documentation is really important. I think a lot of companies have different ways of doing it. I was so excited to hear somebody mention DHRs earlier, because that's what I'm going to talk about right now. DHR is really simple. The history should just be like a journal. We did this. Here's a link to the prototype. Here's the feedback from the client. Here's a link to a Google Groups conversation we had about it. It's just a list of everything that was discussed, so when someone joins the team, they can get up to speed. The more important thing, though, is the rationale bit. Actually explaining why you did things. I worked on abuse at Twitter. You can imagine there's a lot of questions about, like, why did you do this? Why did you do that? And you need to be able to do this. When someone joins the team and they said, why in the world did we do this thing? You shouldn't be like, oh, don't ask, or, oh, we tried that and it didn't work. You should be able to say, here's the case study. These were assumptions made about 12 months ago when we made that decision. Things might have changed. Please, challenge these assumptions, but start from the basis of what actually happened and not just a water cooler conversation about how, it didn't work for some reason no one can remember. Finally, number 4, audio notes. This is such a simple concept, but it's really changed my whole career. When you're in a meeting, if you record audio, that's a good start. If you record audio that can actually synchronize what you are typing to the playhead, that's enormous. If you're in a meeting and somebody says something great at the 37th minute, And so you haven't been taking any notes until then, but as soon as they say something great, you go tippity tippity tap. It makes a little flag there, and what that means is that later, when you touch your finger on that part, it jumps the playhead there. And that's really important, because when you're in a meeting, you think everyone's on the same page, because we all heard the same things. But as time goes on, it's like a game of telephone. People kind of remember different things. It can be really, really valuable to capture it in this way. Now, the 4 things that I just talked about, we're halfway done. 4 things that I just talked about were all about making sure we're referring to the same information. And I feel like, I sort of think of this as like buckets of information, or like water or something. And you kind of want the buckets to kind of go from one to the next. So we all know that right now, when you have a discussion, it can kind of disappear. So audio notes, I think, really help making sure it gets into the documentation officially. And if in that documentation, you make sure you have one place, because you're using a Go link, and you're writing DHRs, so everything is really well documented, well, then you have really good analysis and rationale. When someone asks, why did we use the hamburger? This was an actual debate at Microsoft. Then you can actually explain it. You can actually point to the research, and everyone is actually looking at the same thing. It's huge. If you do that, you can have real collective wisdom. Everyone on your team will eventually quit. So what happens a lot, I think, on software teams is that there's churn, and you're sort of reinventing the wheel from scratch every single time. So now let's talk about the next 4 things. These next 4 things are not just about making sure we're sharing the same information. It's about going even broader than just your team. Going to go a little bit bigger. And it all starts with a very tangible process. Motivation chart. This is really simple. When someone joins the team, you're kicking off a new relationship with a client, let's say. You go, here's everyone that's involved. John's going to be leading up the design. Daniel's the PM we're going to be talking to. But check this part out. Bloop. This looks like gossip, but it's not just gossip. It's very important gossip. Knowing that the CEO wants to ship by Christmas, but that the PM really wants to hit it out of the park, but the CTO is dealing with a technical problem right now, and he's excited, but he's also a little concerned because that is the first step to a successful design. You have to understand everyone's motivation. You should be putting this into your design documentation. You should be showing it to everyone that joins the team so everybody understands what success is going to look like, because it's contextual based on the team. You can also do the same thing internally. We do a thing called Thrive Plans. Thrive Plans are really simple. You just say to designers, how do you like to work best? And they do whatever they want. As you can imagine, mine is a comic, but other people write, like a Google Doc. Some people take a picture of a whiteboard. You're just explaining how you like to work. And again, you're gonna see contradictions, and that's fine. A really common one is someone being like, I hate talking over email, can you just pick up the phone? But then you have another designer being like, I would rather die than talk on the phone. And so knowing that that exists on your team is the first step to actually addressing it. And it shows a lot of respect and compassion that you're even asking how people like to work, and then you can navigate around it. Number 6, cookbooks as a metaphor. This changed my life. Somebody asked me, hey, John, you like to run workshops, can you do some best practices? I was like, yeah, I'm very enthusiastic. And then I realized, hold on, but it's all based on context. The size of the workshop in terms of the number of people there, the size of the room that you're going to be dealing with. Do you have a whiteboard? Do you have a projector? Does anyone know where the sticky notes are? These are all things that are going to affect the workshop. And so instead of thinking about things as right and wrong, black and white, this is the right way to do it, that's the wrong way to do it, thinking about a cookbook is kind of cool, because you just go, hey, here at our company, here are 5 recipes we've discovered for kicking off a great workshop. Use one that fits you. Here are 3 ways to run the core of the workshop, and here are 5 ways to finalize it. There's something beautiful about this. Number 1, you're teaching your younger designers that design is not about right and wrong. It's about trade-offs and understanding context so you can get the right solution. But it's also cool for the older people, because if an older designer comes and they see that this is the way we do things here, you're going to shut down their desire to share their ways of doing things because they feel like they're challenging the status quo. But if it's a cookbook, it's like, oh yeah, I've got some recipes, I'll go add them in. It's a much better way to think about design. It's a much better way to include more people and having more diversity of thought. Number 7, I do not know what UNI stands for. I think it's one of these fake acronyms, but we call it the UNI tool. This is on Windows Phone. On Windows Phone, we had 100 designers, and we're dealing with thousands of screens. Every single app installed on Windows Phone needed to have, designers, and every designer had lots of different screens. And they didn't all use the same software. Some you liked Illustrator, some liked Photoshop. We didn't have Sketch because it was all on Windows. And so you had all these different people doing all these different things, and it was hard to have one set of one understanding of what things look like. So we did this. It's just a very simple on the face of it, a very simple website where you could say, okay, I want to know email, what does the composed screen look like? Ah, there it is. And then on the side, it would even show like a code sample of how that screen was made. But here's the beautiful part, and this blew my mind when I saw it. This was 10 years ago, and I've still never seen something this amazing. Here's why this is amazing. That third screen did not come from the designer. At night, every single night, a robot took a screenshot of every single screen on Windows Phone, thousands of them. And what that meant for you as a designer is you'd come in the morning and see like, oh, my screen changed. Maybe it's because I put in a request to make this happen. Maybe my engineer, a bug slipped into the code. Maybe a million things. Maybe there was some component that someone addressed and it touched 15 screens. This tool allowed us to know what was actually happening to the design and not what the designers thought in their own head. One metaphor that I heard about this one time that I thought was kind of cool was thinking about a map versus the actual land in front of you. A lot of design systems, as great as they are, they're still a map. It still is what Sketch thinks it should look like. It's not what your user is actually seeing. And this is compounded by like responsive design and all this, but I have still never seen anything this amazing. I thought of it as like the secret weapon at Windows Phone. Apparently it didn't work because Windows Phone did not succeed, but it was great. I also have a dream that one day you'll be able to be in Sketch and like your cursor will be on a component and you'll like move your cursor around and you should see on a second screen every screen that change might be affecting. Again, not Sketch's opinion of what that will do, but actual based on what a device would show stuff. I think that'd be amazing. All right, the final thing that I want to show you is called Ideas Factory. If you're anything like me, you go out on the internet, you go to conferences, you get inspired, and that's all the arrows over there. Also, if you're like me, you have no idea what that second step is, but you know that things ship. So you go to your CEO, you're like, I really want to do this thing. And then they're like, no. And you're like, all right, and then you don't do it. So it's hard to figure out how to get it through there. Well, we came up with this thing. We just called it Ideas Factory, and it was so simple. We just gave it a name, and then we started talking about what the leadership would get out of it if they let us think about these big topics. In fact, I have a little comic explaining how I used to do it versus how we do it now. So I used to ask, hey, can I just do this thing called 20% time? Google does it. Can I also do it? And they'd say no. But now we're like, hey, we all agreed that these are the 30 tech things that we're going to go investigate. Here's the next one on the list. Give me 5 days. I will make you a presentation. We're going to try to sell it to these clients. It makes it in the language of business, and therefore, people say yes more. It's the same thing, but just giving it a name makes all the difference in the world. Because, and this is a harsh truth, but it took me a while to learn it, great design does not speak for itself. And I used to think this was sad. I used to think like, well, that's too bad. It's not too bad, because if great design spoke for itself, we wouldn't have jobs. It's good that we need humans in there explaining, oh, this is what this says, and here's a story about how we might do it. This is actually good, even though it seems kind of sad at first. At least it did for me. Now on to my glorious conclusion. See, I have a header, it says it. I want to talk a little bit about just like making impact. So all this stuff that I talked about, I think when you start out as a creative person, you kind of figure out what you believe. So you go on long walks and you learn to write better and you meditate and you do all these things to try to figure out what in the world you want to do. And if you figure out what you want to do, then you can make change on your things, like your portfolio. As time goes on, you start figuring out, okay, this is hard. How do I take the things that I believe and impact the team around me? That's really hard. You could live 100 years and still be finding more techniques to get better at working with others. It's really hard. It's not a thing that you check off your list. It's just a thing that you work at. But then at a really high level, the total black belt level is, all right, my team is running really well, but now I want to make this greater impact. I want to affect other teams in my company, other companies, the world. And I don't think everybody necessarily has a desire to go that big, straight out of the gate. But it is an interesting thought that like you're sort of stepping your way down the line of impact. And that's what I tried to base this talk on. The first 4 things that I was talking about is all about making those lines between people work better. And it's hard. Those are the 4 recipes that I found that can help with it, though. And then the remaining 4 or 5 is at that other level, is saying, okay, so now that your team's working pretty well, how do you take that really well-working team and go further? So remember when I first got up here, I said, what success looks like for me is I want you to have a good time at this conference, and I want you to learn things, and I want you to be inspired. But I have one last idea, and that is this. It's not just about going to a conference to have a good time. It's not just about going to a conference to be inspired. It's about learning how to inspire others. Thank you very much.